Hello and welcome to this presentation of Work Package 5 by me, Simon Usherwood from the University of Surrey and now the Open University in the UK. I'm going to be talking about some preliminary results from our survey of civil society organisations, which is still in the field. We can already give you some indication of the theory, how we're trying to explore that, how that relates to the main PROTECT agenda, and also some implications for policymakers. The presentation really starts off by looking at the question of how civil society organisations, CSOs, work and function within the realm of migration policy and refugee policy. In particular, the conceptualization here is that they represent a really important interface between other organizations, particularly those of the states and of international bodies, and individuals on the ground. So by exploring that, by trying to get a sense of who these groups are, what they do, what their intentions are, we aim to enrich the cleavage approach that Hakan has elaborated with his model in order to see how that works in practice. Importantly here, I'd say that one of the things about CSOs is that they are very flexible bodies by their nature, that they're not set up by a particular framework or a constitutional set of obligations. So they tend to be very well adapted to particular needs. And the way that we've gone about that is through a survey of civil society organisations in about 17 countries, so many EU member states, the UK, but also Canada and South Africa. And in terms of where we are at this point, at the end of the summer of 2021, we've used data from the surveys that have been done under Work Package 7 of social media and of traditional media to look for references to groups. So anything that is not a state body, that is not a political party, is included. So we've got a whole range from your classic interest groups and pressure groups, activists working the field, but also looking at businesses, many of whom have activities that relate or pertain. We've used that to build a bigger list, which we have been contacting through an online survey, which looks at these different areas. So thinking about their work with migrants and migration policy, their attitudes and objectives, and here we've carried over the survey items that have been done in Work Package 6, looking at public opinion, and also their understanding of the two global compacts on refugees and migration to see how that has played out, because that's an important part of what we're trying to do. So in terms of theory, we've been working on a theoretical framework and using the concept of opportunity structures that in essence, we're arguing that these bodies, like any other, respond to incentives, that they are more likely to form in places where there are good opportunities either to avoid interference or to make an impact. And the theoretical framework argues these key points, which, as I've already said, are that CSOs are more agile than state bodies, precisely because they're outside of a set of constraints that tend to make state bodies and international organizations relatively slow. And as such, you tend to find CSOs operating where there are gaps in state action. So that might be a structural incapacity, that states simply don't have the resource or indeed the willingness to do a particular activity or to meet a particular need. But it might also be that in the event of rapidly changing situations, such as we've seen from 2015 in Europe, that states simply might not have the capacity to meet immediate and pressing requirements. So the argument, if we take it back to the cleavage model of Hakan, is that we would tend to see activism in relation to policy that skews towards the globalist and the regionalist positions in that model. So this is to say that groups that see responsibilities towards refugees and towards migrants as principled, as an intrinsic part of human rights, of equality, or indeed of legal obligations that transcend those of the state, are much more likely to be operating in this field. And the reason for that is that those bodies that tend to take a more restrictive view of migration or of refugees and asylum seekers tend to be more concerned with protecting the state, and they tend not to see the same opportunities for or the same incentives for being active. So those bodies that are focused more precisely and fully on migration policy tend towards that more inclusive and positive construction of migration. So that's some theory. What do we find in terms of practice? And again, this is an ongoing survey, so we have a relatively limited sample, but we can already say a number of things. The first is that there is clearly a significant community of CSOs who are involved in this field. We have contacted somewhere in the region of 300 bodies, and we're looking to pick up more as we go along. And it's clear that even with that large number across those countries, there are many more that are involved. And importantly, it's not just CSOs operating within states, it's also across states. And this is a particularly distinctive feature. And we also found that in the responses we've got a high level of connectivity. So CSOs report that they are talking with states, with international bodies, with sub-regional authorities, but also across within their community, and across to different countries. So you're looking at a very well-connected community that exists, which matters because it means that it improves knowledge flows, it allows for sharing of resource in particular cases, which allows them to be, again, more agile as they go along. We also see that those CSOs that are directly working with refugees are indeed so far all globalist or regionalists. So as you might not be too surprised to find, if you are bothered enough to work with refugees, then it's because you tend to see that there is a moral or a legal obligation to do so, rather than taking a position that these people have no place in your country. That gives no reason then to work with them. It's also worth noting that the CSOs that we've had reports into the survey who work with state bodies, and that's a significant number of them, are usually also identifying areas of policy that they're trying to shape and to shift. So it's not an uncritical engagement that takes place. It's also about trying to lobby and to shape policy as we go along. And in many of the cases that we've seen, for the reason that I've explained in the previous bullet points, that's because they see moral incentives for greater state action to be taking place. We might also note that awareness and understanding of the two global compacts is rather varied. On the one hand, there seems to be a good level of awareness of the global compact on migration, but rather less so for the global compact for refugees. Now, It's not clear at this stage quite what the reason for that difference is, but in both cases, it's clear that whilst there's an appreciation amongst these bodies that these compacts exist, that doesn't necessarily mean that they have been particularly involved in their formulation or indeed their implementation. In the cases where, though, we have had reports back from CSOs who have been involved in the formulation and implementation, they tend to have clearer views about what the compacts should do. And typically they are pushing for more binding conditions. So turning it from a compact into a more binding UN instrument is something that we've seen reported back. So again, this reflects the willingness of CSOs to engage with policymakers, with state bodies, with international organizations, but also their desire to move the debate along. And all of this takes us really to the question of how does this matter beyond the academic findings and interests that we might generate. So I've outlined here 3 key points. The first one is that the volume and the complexity and the activity of CSOs point to them being an essential part of the landscape in and around migration policy and refugee policy. And as such, policymakers need to take into consideration the work of CSOs, whatever their states or international organizations' own policy might be. And the reason for that is twofold. The first is that CSOs can be very effective partners. That flexibility, that specialized capacity that they have to deal with particular questions and aspects, whether that's helping to manage the integration of refugees and migrants into host country communities, or dealing with critical situations in countries of transition. All of that can be a very valuable resource to other bodies. And that connection of CSOs to one another in a community also points to the importance of recognizing that work with one body can also generate positive effects more broadly within the community. But also, and the second point here, is that CSOs are agents for change. That as well as helping refugees or working with refugees and migrants, they also have policy preferences that they wish to advance. And typically those most active within the field are pushing for a more rigorous policy that strengthens the requirements on states and international bodies to act to help individuals. And if we understand how that works, that can both be a way of advancing state agendas where those coincide, but also it can be a way to ensure that there is a more effective delivery. So for all these reasons, we can already see, and this is something we'll be developing in the rest of the PROTECT project, how CSOs can be the glue that helps stick together the different elements of the broader environment in which this takes place. I'm very happy to take questions from you, either at the midterm conference itself, or you can contact me through the PROTECT website. Thanks very much for listening, and I look forward to talking with you at the conference.